From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tomoko Steen here at the Science and Technology and Business Division's Library of Congress. I'm a research specialist and specialized in science. In fact, today's speaker is a professor of business. So, in fact, the business expert in my division should have been introduced this excellent speaker. But I happen to get to know him, and I'm so lucky to learn a lot about his research. So today's speaker, Professor Ketcham, is the professor at University of Houston, and he's kind enough to come and share his current research on the space ethics. A lot of people asked me, what the space ethics is. I think you have to ask him. And he has a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. And he is also CPCU, so I'm not an expert in business, so I'm not familiar with it. But he is chartered property casualty underwriter also, and that is he's a property casualty insurance and risk management expert. So very interesting, point of view of looking at space topics from the business point of view, and we facing a commercialization, and the space exploration has been always very much of a concern for the two scientists I actually personally knew, the Joshua Lederberg and Carl Sagan. But now its commercialization adds another, concern, and it's exciting and very interesting things to think about. And today's topic is space ethics. So before further ado, please join me to welcome our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Steen. Thank you, Library of Congress, and thank all of you for coming here. Now, as a risk management guy, people accuse us of wearing both belts and suspenders. But what we're talking about is the ultimate risk, and that, of course, is in space. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages. Oh, no. Let's go back a little bit farther than Star Trek and see where we began in the space race. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back at the triangle. I have to hit the triangle, the page up button, right? Down. Okay. I'm going to take you back just months before President Kennedy announced his vision of putting a man on the moon before the decade was out. Outgoing President Eisenhower gave his farewell address. In it, he said, quote, "The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite," unquote. The military-industrial complex has dominated the space program since its beginning. Even before Sputnik, the idea of weaponizing space with missiles and satellites has been the centerpiece of government policy. Industry has elbowed its way into the fray, capitalizing on communications, GPS, and other military advances to improve communication, weather forecasting, and the lives of people and business around the world. Like any effort begun in war, as was the space race, technology finds its way into the hands of people who are not associated with war. It is unfortunate that war is the genesis of such improvements, but we as a species seem not able to extract ourselves from conflict and combat. Now I am going to ask you to channel Carl Sagan for a minute and think, what was his famous word? billions. So I want you to think in billions and even trillions now, because what people are saying is they're getting what Greenspan might have called irrational exuberance over the prospect of doing really great things in space. The National Space Society claims its rationale for promoting space settlement is the survival of the human species. Even going that far, we're looking at. The Space Frontier Group, a California-based advocacy group with a similar vision, claims it's dedicated to opening the space frontier to human settlement as rapidly as possible. Billions. Think billions. Now, in 2008, Jacques Arnauld and André Dubus declared ethics is in some sense the frontier in space exploration. The frontier of exploration is being pushed outward at a rapid pace, bringing the need for complex ethical analysis to the fore today and not into the future. We're embarking upon a new use for space, and that is peace. Physicists and astronomers increasingly use space to improve our understanding of the universe and its forces. We have discovered water, precious minerals, rare earth elements on celestial objects. We scan the heavens for alternative Earths and Goldilocks zones where conditions for life might be present. We gaze longingly at Mars for opportunities to support a separate colony for life outside of the Earth. Companies like Planetary Resources have been formed to mine asteroids once the technology becomes available to do so. Moon Express plans on mining rare earth element helium-3 on the moon within the next few years. Enigmatic India, with its intractable poverty, has since the 1960s built a successful space operation that's very economical and will undoubtedly attract many who want to get to space very inexpensively. Space has been made available for humanity. However, we must face and overcome considerable hurdles to do so. As Eisenhower warned us, we are still primarily thinking technology in the space race. It is now we must begin to consider the human and not just the long-term survivability of a Mars lander, but the sociology and ecology of space colonies and its companion, the macroeconomics of space industry and commerce. Here's why we must begin now. Successful International Space Station resupplier SpaceX is working on a rocket capable of holding 100 passengers on a long trip in order to place their goal of 1 million persons on Mars. Mars One from the Netherlands wants to send a colony to Mars on a one-way ticket to be funded by a Truman-like show, reality television series about the colonists. Very interesting prospect. SpaceX warns that the risk of death for these new age astronauts will be high. Why? Colonists will be ordinary humans, not the astronauts that the logic-driven, risk-calculating, cool under fire astronauts that we've been used to in the past. While the National Space Society has been discussing space settlements since the mid-1970s, we remain today like Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea, who on the urging of President Jefferson set out into the wilderness of the Louisiana Purchase to see what use of the new republic could make of all this wilderness. Of course, we did make use of the land and have prospered and grown because of it. We also did some nasty things to the indigenous inhabitants, both human and animal. The wilderness of space is our next place of exploration. However, distance, radiation, vacuum, cold, and time itself far exceed the considerable obstacles Lewis, Clark, Sacagawea, and others endured on their 19th century voyage of discovery. Star Wars and Star Trek both present space as a place of war. Whether armed with the force of photon torpedoes, military organizations pit right against might through federation, or empires with efforts towards diplomacy, but diplomacy backed up with weapons, we can only imagine Little mention is made of the millions of people who go through their lives of quiet desperation in the frontier outposts exposed to adverse weather, hostile forces, corruption, and bandits, just like our own pioneers endured during the 19th century. We read the dystopian novels like Red Rising about the Martian mining community that becomes a caste system complete with its disposable untouchables. These fictional accounts explore not only fictional human proclivities to put profits before people and far outposts where industrials create new mining communities reminiscent of those company towns so prevalent in the early industrialization of this country and Europe. When we build space colonies, we will bring our own human issues, frailties, and problems with us. Space gives us an opportunity to rethink our own propensity towards war and hegemony. However, our nascent efforts foretell an inauspicious beginning. We continue to weaponize space. We conduct science and business alongside spy and weaponized satellites. Like the rivers of the 1960s, we have riddled near-Earth space lanes with space junk that is becoming a critical navigation hazard. Even as we pursue space productivity, we are confined to a little world of 25,000 miles circumference, which we continue to use with considerable abandon. Space is huge, measured in light years, not kilometers. We can rationalize that we should litter someplace, but there are many others that are pristine, and we can go there. We can solve problems of overpopulation, refugees, poverty by establishing colonists on Mars who will take our tired, poor, and huddled masses, learning to breathe free. Breathe is the first operative word. The second is radiation, the third gravity, a third of our own. We may have to live underground like moles on Mars because the planet has no magnetic field to deflect the sun's radiation. For the foreseeable future, we must import everything, even water if we can't distill whatever water that is near the surface, which is likely even to be more salty than the Dead Sea. I suggest that before we go too far in conquering space using some same brute force we've used on our own planet and its orbit, that we pause and begin to understand both the implications and opportunities that space provides. In other words, we need to consider what we might become an ethics of space, including how we govern and police ourselves as we begin the human occupation of the cosmos. Any ethics we have of space necessarily will involve societal, organizational, and business implications. We went to the moon to prove military superiority. We must now think beyond pure science, weapons, and begin to reason like business persons, but with an eye towards a reasonable ethical foundation as a restraint against undue exploitation of people or celestial bodies. Economics will certainly be an early challenge of deep space once we figure out how to thrive outside of our own planet. Regardless of the persistent outcry against regulation, we let business and commerce run without significant hindrance. This is a good thing because it produces competition, innovation, and wealth. On Earth, we can inspect manufacturing facilities, products, and monitor how people are treated by industry. How long will it take and how much will it cost to send an inspector to a human outpost 10 million miles away? What are the patrol vessels that will stop piracy, looting, and malfeasance? Where are our aircraft carriers in the universe? Will commercial vessels need to be like Star Wars' Millennium Falcon, bristling with guns? Will its Captain Han Solo operate like a 18th or 19th century pirate in the rich space lanes of the asteroid belt? Are we ready for a Klondike gold rush where everyone is for himself or herself? Are we ready for Bad Bart, hanging judges, and cattle wars in the prairie outposts of space? Planetary Resources, the would-be space miners, have identified asteroids consisting of near-pure platinum, each worth as much as, get this, $1 trillion or more if mined and brought back to Earth. Will we let miners, like we did in the Klondike, simply rush towards these celestial objects because they can have the will and the finances to do so? The first will be like robot miners and space dump trucks that will bring ore back to the Earth, or even facilities in space for processing. How much is it going to cost to bring this stuff back down to Earth? We as yet don't know. As was the case in the Klondike and other gold rushes, this platinum rush will benefit the first miners most. After we saturate the Earth with more platinum than we can use, even as we create markets for platinum ware, hubcaps, and bathroom faucets, the cost to mine asteroids will become prohibitive when the market crashes. Mining the asteroid belt takes out its own risks to Earth's environment, perhaps even more so than the gold rush and other mines have. Errant equipment, disasters, and other accidents can alter the orbit of space objects, perhaps even sending one or more on a trajectory towards Earth. How will we regulate space mining? Just as important, who will own the asteroids? In 2015, President Obama signed the H.R. 2262, which permits U.S. citizens to own asteroid resources, both here and in space. Will we divvy up the asteroid belt like the colonial powers of the 18th and 19th century, or we will declare the asteroid belt, as we have declared the open sea, the heritage of humanity, and subject to no individual sovereign? Will we lease asteroids fields like we do to oil drilling rights? For how long? Will we create depletion deductions and taxes as we whittle away space rock and return it to the Earth, the Moon, or Mars for processing? Who will be tasked with enforcing the asteroid acts we actually need to create? The UN? The UN has been useful dealing with many earthly issues and has debated, and many countries have signed space treaties and declarations. Is the UN really the right place for space governance? This is an important concern because there are many questions about governance in space. One looming one is who will police the incredibly vast space lanes against piracy, space junk, and other navigational issues, or step up when interplanetary mining dump trucks are hijacked and ransomed or sold on the black market. We will send earthly microbes into empty space, the planets, their moons, and other celestial bodies. We've already done so despite the heroic efforts of NASA's Office of Planetary Protection and the statements by COSPAR, Committee on Space Research at the UN, scientists who are committed to microbe-free landers. While we have diligent cleanliness standards for orbiters and landers, the operational standards cannot prevent some spores and bacteria from hitching a ride to the Moon, Mars, or any other body we have visited or intend to visit. We've brought life to Mars. We don't know yet whether it will be reanimated or reanimate itself, but it's on our rovers. It just takes one bacteria to find a niche and divide. That's the issue we have to deal with life. Remember the old saw from Jurassic Park? Life finds a way. When we land the first human with a gut full of bacteria, skin crawling with tiny mites, viruses, and other critters steps outside the airlock, we bring life to the place where we step. Any breach in the air suit or hull will life escape. Some life may take it in places in the wild or inside of closed colonies and begin to evolve separately from the Earth. We know, for example, that the International Space Station is creating its own ecology. Microbes are evolving to thrive in the conditions present at the station and the migration of people in and out. When we establish a Martian colony, it must become more or less self-sufficient. What schemes of ecology are we going to establish to maintain a viable system of life for the long term? What mix of plants and animals? How will we deal with the evolution or normal cycles or even accidents that threaten the colonial ecosystems we likely will need to maintain for our own existence on Mars? Later, we may want to terraform Mars if we can ever figure that one out. But in either case, we'll still create a separate evolving world where microbes that once evolved only on Earth will evolve independently on Mars. Travel back and forth will create opportunities for invasive species, insects, and others to wreak havoc on other celestial bodies and even Earth itself. Humans have little regard for intergenerational justice beyond the next two generations comprising children and grandchildren. Our lives only extend that far, and to think beyond one somewhat becomes clouded about the uncertainty. And it isn't our problem. Business horizons are often 90 days or at most a year. We rationalize and say, well, our grandparents had to deal with it, let them deal with it. Our own death is a finality we cannot seem to think beyond. What I'm asking is that we think beyond the next 2 generations and at least begin a dialogue on the major issues that we as a species and even life itself will be facing over the countless millions of generations into the future. I'm not asking us to predict the state of humanity, the world, and our ventures in space 1 billion years from now. What I'm asking is that we establish a line of dialogue for as many of the issues of space and space ethics we can envision that we will likely encounter. We are entering a new phase which I call the Cosmocene. Recall that the Anthropocene is the term used by many to describe humanity's impact on the Earth ecology. The dinosaurs had their own scene, we have ours. The Cosmocene asks what impact we're going to have on space. First, space in our solar system, which is vast enough. And then next, the Milky Way galaxy that is distant, unimaginable. If we can better phrase the basic questions we will need to continually address, I suggest we will embark upon a path towards an intergenerational ethics of space for which we will eventually look back and say this is much a crowning achievement as a theory of relativity, the first man-moon mission, and the idea of democracy. The Independent Scientific Committee on Space Research, COSPAR, and our own NASA are good places to begin. But we must add, and Dr. Steen knows this, economists, business persons, financial analysts, financiers, social psychologists, sociologists, and biologists in addition to doctors, engineers, and physicists. We want to create not only an economic engine of space, but also a viable ecological and sociological colonization system in places hostile to humanity and life itself. There's not enough time in this forum to discuss each of the questions associated with commerce, travel, habitation, alien life, and other topics we'll need to explore. We need more forums like this one where such questions can be developed and debated before we begin the process of living and working in space on other celestial bodies in earnest. I suggest we must do this before those who want to exploit the heavens set problematic precedences that may be difficult to overcome. I'll spend the rest of this time I have with you to begin the discussion of one issue in more depth, and that is human space governance. And there's not been a lot of attention on this. Governance of human space travel to this point has been in the command control style of the military. This is expected to continue on the space station and probably even the first lander on Mars. Science and military work together not only to design scientific protocol, but to produce the discipline and chain of command in the limited space of the space station or future exploratory landings. Astronauts have been like SEAL teams. They work together, they know how to solve problems, and everything else. Look at the good, bad, and ugly in our world. Our colonies are going to contain all types of persons and attitudes. We'll need jails. We'll need drug and alcohol clinics. We'll need suicide watches. The scope and size of things will change once industry and government begin permanent colonization endeavors. There are never possible governance models I'd like to explore with you a little bit today. These are not all of them by any means, but they're a taste of what we might be up against. One we can call the offshore drilling platform model. This would be a commercial venture where workers are employed by a specific business or government enterprise to work full-time for a period of time at a site, for example, at an asteroid mining operation. While we have employment rules for U.S. companies on employee treatment, pay, safety, and other requirements, we do not have a workable system for other worlds at this point. Granted, we have 5 space treaties governing to some extent space exploration, near-Earth orbit, rescue, liability, equipment regulation, registration, and a treaty to make space a peaceful region. None of these has really been tested. None includes human governance to any real extent. Disease, conditions of space, force majeure, lack of transparency are all issues where enforceability from Earth or even other outposts may be challenging. Distance and time also complicates worker-only outposts. Workers may be required to work for years or even decades without relief because the cost to transport them to and from work will be prohibitive. With present equipment capabilities, a round-trip journey to Mars will be like a sea voyage around the world in Magellan's time. Long, stressful, and quite often boring. Magellan could stop and replenish his stuff on islands. We can't even do that as we go to Mars. We can expect troubles, fights, medical emergency, insurrection, suicide, and any other manner of irregularities when people are confined in restricted place with the same persons for months or years on end. Can you just imagine hearing this every day for a year? Are we there yet? And can you play the license plate game in space? No. Lots of video games and people bouncing off walls. The lack of social structure in the offshore model compounds this. There may be no spouses, children, and life outside the work environment. We'll likely find that the offshore oil platform model is not sustainable ultimately because of the time and challenges of space for anything other than our moon. Another model is what we call the expat community. This is where business ships the workers and their families to remote work outposts. This will become a more or less permanent outpost where families live, work, socialize, and go to school. The expat community is really the model for the old company town. The question of governance looms large here as it did in the company towns of old. The employer is the community administrator, the source of commerce, the owner of property, and the purveyor of justice. There will be limited power of the community to overcome oppressive tactics by the business itself. One cannot challenge the work conditions on the threat of being sacked. What if one is sacked? Okay, we're going to send you home in 3 decades. What do you do between now and then? This form of governance may be touted as being fair, equitable, and wonderful from the shiny pamphlets of employers who want you to go there. All I remember is the fruit pickers from the Grapes of Wrath. Shiny posters. Great work, great pay. Neither one happened. A third approach has a number of different options. All are based upon a pioneer model. Recall that when we decided to populate the prairies in the 19th century, we offered free land. In the space pioneer model, we probably will have to offer the equivalent of the sod house, the containment vessel essential for life at a remote outpost. People will still arrive as settlers rather than squat and improve the land as were the requirements to own the land during pioneer days. Persons will be picked based on their skills required to sustain the outpost. You're going to have a certain number of doctors, you need a lawyer, you need biologists, you need farmers, you need a little bit of everything. You need sanitation experts, you need water, people, everything. In a strong governance approach, the local colony legally and constitutionally is attached to earthly governments. This form of governance early on will look like the current command and control ventures, but will need to evolve checks and balances, not unlike what is available in the U.S. today. In this type of outpost, there will be the need to be, of all things we find in communities or more, governments, jobs, entertainment, education, medical care, and justice will need to be there. The beginning colony will have as its primary goal to become self-sufficient and self-sustaining. This likely will require regular supply missions from Earth to replace medicines and machinery that not be possible to produce at the earliest outposts. Early outposts of this sort may be run almost like communes, where there will be little need for a capitalist economy, just survival. Likely these colonies will be expensive to establish and operate. Who's going to continue to pay for them when they don't necessarily turn a profit for how many decades or hundreds of years perhaps? An alternative to the same model we might call the pioneer condominium community. In this form of governance, the colonists invest their own money in the colony and pay off creditors, which might be government or industry at the very beginning. Eventually, such colonists will own a piece of the colony and can sell or dispose of it per colony regulations. We must also worry that the billionaires will buy up units and turn tenants into sharecroppers. In another variation of pioneer condominium model, the government subsidizes the entire colony, but colonies are then weaned off the subsidy, sort of like a mortgage, over time as they begin to produce surplus goods which can be exchanged for earthly goods. Individuals may then be deeded title, much the same as our pioneer ancestors. What if they cannot produce enough to eliminate the subsidy? What happens then? We don't have any provisions for this. Likely you can imagine other organization systems. The pioneer form of organization is more likely to be feasible on a large celestial body such as the moon or Mars in a large-scale operation. Colonies may be established next to or near industrial operations such as mine or manufacturing facilities. Some workers will be in the factories or mine, and some will be doing other jobs, producing food, recycling waste and water, governing policy, education, and justice. In any of these scenarios, it's a question of independence and what that means. All colonies will have measures of independence just like earthly pioneers. However, we know that our own revolution was fought in part because of taxation without representation. Earth, what services are you really providing us now that we're pretty much operating on our own? How come we have to pay all these taxes? Distance and time will spread earthly resources thin. Insurrections, revolts, mutinies, takeovers, and despots could occur and become entrenched before a policing vessel can arrive at the colony. In a weak earth governance approach, colonies may also become separate countries, which means the need for a galactic organization that governs interspatial commerce, defense, and immigration. Enforcement to rein in rogue colonies presents other humanitarian issues. Penetration weapons in a confined colony that's about as thick as a tin can will surely be disastrous. Then, of course, no matter what system of governance, these will be pioneer outposts. It's not likely that medical care will approach that on Earth. Mortality rates are likely to be higher. Psychological issues associated with depression, phobias, anxiety, suicide will likely require a different approach to psychiatry and close environment outpost. Think submarines, especially nuclear submarines that are out for a very long period of time because they don't have to refuel. They can make their own water. They can recycle the air. However, we've seen before with the pioneers, those who left the East Coast to settle in the plains were a hardy bunch who sought relief from crowded cities or farming communities where land was too expensive for the poor to purchase. With atmospheric challenges before any terraforming occurs, you can't spread out. You're stuck in a small space. You can't gut those 40 acres out there in that mule because there are no more 40 acres. Everybody has their own. So what becomes of Earth in this new interplanetary interspace model? With growing populations on Earth, there may be persons who can't see the value of migrating to a space outpost because they have no opportunities here. As production becomes more automated and we enter in the area of driverless cars, store-less purchasing, what will people do with their lives without jobs? Likely in the U.S., that's not in our blood to give someone a sustainable living wage for not working, even if they can't get a job because they don't have the proper education to do what the new jobs demand. Will space colonies be places where these workers will go to find work? No matter what form of outpost we envision or ever build, early efforts are likely to produce economic equations that will first rely heavily on subsidies or large debt to entrepreneurs. We do not yet have an economic model of space that accounts for the extraordinary costs of travel and existence in the pursuit of profits from productivity. While we may see the early asteroid farmers make fortunes, the law of supply and demand on precious metals and other commodities will likely make these remote operations less and less profitable until there is a large enough space economy to support that kind of activity. We require a better understanding just of what economic engines of space will be out there and how will it be operate, and what forms of social organization and governance that will work in space. Remember, space is going to be a lot different than here. Confined, minimal resources, not a huge environment. You know, trashing the one ficus tree might earn you a place not just in hell, but somewhere else entirely. We must factor in transportation, operating, and existence costs in space compared to Earth. We might discover that the economics of space does not require including Earth in a viable two-way trading partner, except for select products or commodities that cannot yet be made in space. Industry and persons on Earth probably can supply themselves better than we can from space. The cost to lift from the Earth the necessary goods for space colonies likely will continue to be prohibitive, further isolating the Earth from space trade. Presuming low-cost robotic vessels, the expense to do the same may be less from our moon to Mars or through the asteroid belt because all experience less gravity than Earth. I suggest that there is a distinct possibility that trade between space parties might become independent from Earth in many ways, including raw materials such as ores for smelters and manufacturing facilities, seeds and frozen food trade, medicines and the like. Persons who become accustomed to or are born in lower gravity may not be able to visit Earth, let alone face off earthly diseases. Education might also become a commodity as candidates compete for entry into Mars's elite Olympus Mons University. Finally, what about democracy? That all depends upon how much in return and control will the billionaires like Elon Musk and others want from their investment. How beholden will space colonists and travelers be to space entrepreneurs? Will they install their governors and administrators as the European monarchies did when they established colonies? These are all questions that must be asked before the ships begin to launch. Which form of governance or economics am I advocating? I'm not advocating anything because we don't have all the answers yet. As a matter of fact, we have very few answers. But what I'm asking is that we begin today to ask questions and put the question of governance, social organization, and justice in the forefront of any long-term discussions of venture, of commerce, or commercialization outside of Earth's orbit. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. Yes.
And then we obviously talk about films. Blade Runner was a movie that was made in 1982, talking about a couple of years from now, and that deals with the concept of slavery, and that slavery returns to a society in the future, and history repeats itself. I'm curious, we have a lot of problems here today. We have slavery still here today in some forms. What's your thoughts of, before we go anywhere, solving a lot of the issues we still have here? Maybe I think this is good because it gives us a balanced comparison to say, well, what if to get to Mars do we need to have in place as we know it from history or now, but what do we need to solve now before we get to Mars? What your thoughts are from that perspective?
So the question is, what do we need to solve now? And specifically, one of the questions that was asked was about slavery itself. And Red Rising specifically talks about issues of businesses employing slaves in the deep mines. They did all the work while the people, the golds on the top, the reds were at the bottom, the golds were at the top. The golds basically were like the gods of old. They basically pranced around, did all sorts of things. They were the intellectual bunch, and the people down on the bottom were the brawn. My suggestion is not necessarily that we're looking for a utopian world outside But we can start clean if we want to. Meaning that if we know that there are things that are difficult here on Earth, do we have to bring them into space? Can we start with more utopian ideas? Can we talk about social responsibility and a social license to operate for companies in space, as opposed to just the idea that shareholders should have their total return, and as long as we obey the laws, we can do anything we want. I don't know about you, but I really don't want to have my employer be in charge of my life, because you know that they're not as well versed in governance as the people who are the governors of today. So I agree with you. We may not be able to solve the problems on Earth, but maybe we can create environments in Mars and other places that people on Earth look up to and say, this is a better deal. Why can't I go there? And if all the best and brightest leave here to go to Mars because it's a better place, what's going to have to happen here on Earth? They're going to, in order to retain the best and brightest, they're going to have to do a better job. So yes, thank you.
So I'm wondering from the sort of industry perspective, have you looked or analyzed much the Biosphere 2 enclosure experiments?
The what?
The Biosphere 2 enclosure experiments?
I have not looked at those. The and can you?
Biosphere 2?
Biosphere 2, no, I have not looked at them specifically.
Yeah, I'm curious because the Biosphereans were existing in models that were somewhere between command control, offshore drilling platform, XPAD, and Pioneer. And yeah.
I think we can learn from things like the Biosphere model. They are very important to learn from. Dr. Steen is working right now on Chernobyl to look at genetic differences from radiation. We have that issue in Mars. Unless we live in the lava tubes that may be there on Mars, we're going to be exposed to a lot more radiation, just like the critters and the humans in Chernobyl. So yes, experiments like what you're talking about that are self-contained biospheres are critical, because what they do for us is they tell us what kind of biosphere do we need to bring to another planet in order to sustain ourselves first. But then the second question is that in a few billion years from now, the sun's going to expand, and we're going to become yesterday's barbecue. There won't be anything left on Earth. Now people are talking about, oh, let's come up with a plan to move the Earth out and move it back. Okay, I like science fiction too, but maybe terraforming Mars is a better route to go. But we need to know, what do we terraform Mars with? Do we like giant redwoods? Do we bring whales? Who has to come? What has to come? What needs to create a long-term environment? With environments like you're talking with that are very small, which we're going to be dealing with, we have to look at the lack of biodiversity. If you have 3 acres of corn and it's all genetically engineered corn, or not necessarily GMO, but has been bred over the years, and that's all we have, someone brings a corn musk to that little place, they don't have a chance. So absolutely, we need to have those kinds of experiments on the Earth today. Yes?
Could I back up a little bit?
Yeah.
Sort of now and looking out a bit. And you mentioned the United Nations and I guess you mean the Outer Space Treaty of 1965.
Yes. The Moon Treaty, there are a bunch of other treaties.
Well, the Outer Space Treaty talks about, and for its parties, that space is to be exclusively for peaceful purposes. The United States has interpreted that to allow the possibility of defensive operations out there. Why isn't it worth spending more time looking at a more internationalized approach to the use of space in terms of international entities doing things, either like joining forces with the space platforms now, the Chinese, the International International Space Center, and things like monitoring of military activities here through what the French talked about already in the late 70s, an international satellite monitoring agency. Isn't it worth putting some effort into that sort of thing?
So the question is it worth putting effort into creating more or less an international cooperation group? And that is one of the big questions that I have is, what should that look like and what should it contain? I say early on, and I mean very early on, we're going to run into space piracy. We're going to have someone hide behind a planet with a weapon that gets a guided missile that can be sent to this orbiter out here to disrupt the commerce of that particular platinum mining facility. We're going to have people who are going to trash each other's satellites or other orbiters while they're going. So I definitely believe that there is a need for an international organization. And quite frankly, let's face it. The economics and costs of this thing are going to require a worldwide matrix of people involved with not only creating the rockets to get there, but the governance issues, the laws, an international law of the sea for space that works on that particular kind of thing, near the idea of the Outer Space Treaty, and dealing with issues of problems such as the introduction of microbes into other places. So I agree, yes, that's why I brought up the question, is the UN the proper place for that? Or are they earthly bound and we need to look at something different because this is a whole different, as they would say, kettle of fish, or kettle of aliens, whatever you want to call it. Yes?
We don't have a particularly good history of utopian communities on Earth. They don't last long. Why would we do a better job in space?
So the question is, why would we want to do a utopian community in space since they haven't worked on Earth? Again, I'm not advocating for something that is not allowed to change, as which utopian communities are. What I'm trying to explore with this is the early iterations of what we're going to have to deal with. If we look at the original moon launch, even the International Space Station, they are in some respects utopian communities because they operate in a command and control model that says, in order to be successful in what we're doing, we have to create this kind of environment, which includes restrictions on people, etc. But what I'm saying is that there's going to be an evolution of community out there from more of a command control situation as these things get larger. But we need to have a way of preventing some of the kinds of problems that we've had on Earth. What happens if there's a Pol Pot on the Martian colony? When is anyone going to be able to get there unless we've parked, the Starship Enterprise outside of Mars to be able to take care of that? So we have a whole different way of looking at things that says, and going back to your other questions about, can we do something better in space than we've done on Earth? So there's kind of an equilibrium there as far as the discussions of what are we dealing with. When we can progress to different layers of governance and different forms of governance, maybe there are ways of, once we figure out how to terraform Mars, of actually doing a go west young man type of approach to let people who are coming in and populating the areas so that we can improve the amount of oxygen coming from the plants that are expected to grow there. So there's all sorts of opportunities for evolving. But I think the word justice, and specifically John Rawls' definition of justice. Justice is fairness, given the situation and what we're talking about. And even his law of peoples, and what are the basic rights of humans and animals and even plants and other places. We need to look at those particular things, ask those questions, to be able to define space communities And they're going to be different. You're going to have small communities in the asteroid belt, large communities perhaps on Mars, and perhaps some wild thing that's headed off to Alpha Centauri. Those are all going to be different environments, and we're going to require different forms of at least initial governance.
I hope we have a continuous discussion on this topic. Please join me thanking today's speaker.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.